Yevamos Daf Kuf Tes begins with a Mishnah and contains one additional Mishnah. We have two primary sugyas. The first sugya, which begins in the first Mishnah, is what happens when a woman is divorced and remarried to her husband and then falls to Yibum. Is she considered to be a woman who's falling to Yibum normally from her married husband, or is the status as a Grusha interfere with the Yibum? The Mishnah will have a Machlokes Tanaim in three different cases, and the Gemara will explain four different ways of understanding the Machlokes. Now we get to our next Mishnah, which discusses what happens if a woman falls to Yibum, but her Yavam is married to her sister, who is a Kitana. How does that affect her Yibum because he only has a Dirabanan marriage to her sister? Is that considered to be a problem of Erev or not? The Gemara will get into understanding of what Mian is and how desirable it is, and what is Kedushe Kitana Yitzoma. How does that actually work? What is the status of that? As part of understanding a miyun, we'll get into an agadata listing a number of things we should or should not do, things which are or not desirable activities. So let's begin the Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses three cases of a woman who was divorced, remarried, and then fell to Yibum, divorced and remarried to the same man and then fell to Yibum. So the first is if she was a Gedola all along, and the second is if she was a Ketana all along, and that is a Ketana Yisoma all along. So these two have the same halachas, the halachas between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Eliezer. The Rabbanan say she's considered to fall to Yibum normally. At the time that her husband died, she was married, so she falls to Yibum. Rabbi Eliezer says since she was a Grusha at some point, she's a Grushas Achiv. A Grusha does not fall to Yibum, even though she's remarried afterwards, and therefore she cannot do Yibum. The Gemara will say Rabbi Eliezer does hold that she can do and does have to do Chalitza. Now the case where we have a different halacha, which here everyone agrees, is the case where she was married originally by her father. That is Kedusha Daraisa. She was a Katana, she got Kedushin, he was Makabal Kedushin for her. Daraisa, she was married. Then she was divorced from her husband. That is a divorce Daraisa. She is not considered a Grusha Daraisa. But the father no longer has Rishus to marry her off, because she's considered to be what's called Yisoma B'chai Ha'av, since the father gave up his Rishus over her and gave her to her husband, and her husband withdrew his Rishus from her. She now is on her own. So if she goes and does Kedushin again, that's only Kedushin D'Rabbanan. So this woman is now a Grusha Daraisa, and she's only married D'Rabbanan. There, everybody agrees she's considered to be a Grusha and not a Nesua, and she cannot do Yibum. So the Gemara begins. The Gemara wants to know what is Pshat in Rabbi Elazar. How come Rabbi Elazar holds that her original Gerushin still messes up her Yibum options in the first two cases? So the Gemara first brings a Chacham named Ifa, and he says the reason is because since she was a Grusha at some point, at that moment she was exempt from any possibility of Yibum, even though her husband was still alive, but she was a Grusha, she was going to be usher to do Yibum. And we have a rule that if someone is usher at some point, the Isser never goes away. So the Rabbanan respond to Ifa and they say they can't be correct, because then she wouldn't require Chalitza. She would be totally exempt from Chalitza. She would be an Eshesach. She wouldn't have any Chalitza. Therefore, it can't be the right pshat. Says the Gemara, how do you know that Rabbi Elazar requires chalitza? The Gemara quotes a brisa where Rabbi Elazar says she requires chalitza. Okay, so Ifa then says, I don't know the pshat in Rabbi Elazar. So the Gemara brings a number of other explanations. First comes Abaye. Abaye says Rabbi Elazar is saying she requires chalitza and can't do yibum. It's because he has a suffix. The suffix is, when does the connection to Yibum take place? Does it take place with her original marriage to her original husband includes a zika to Yibum? If it does, then at that moment, the Yibum connection is there. When she becomes a Grusha, that's broken and messed up, and therefore she can never do Yibum again. If, however, Yibum only comes into effect when her husband dies, then it's irrelevant what happened earlier. Any Grusha, that's all ancient history. She is now considered to be a regular wife, and if her husband dies, she falls to Yibum, and therefore then that would be fine. That's what the Chachamim hold. Rabbi Elazar's misapik, he has a suffix which one it is, therefore says he has to be machmir, she has to do chalitza just in case the Yibum only begins at the time of the death of her husband, but she can't do Yibum lest she have had Yibum before, which got messed up when she got divorced from him. That's the Bayis Pshat. Rava says, no, Rabbi Elazar is really clear that it is the death which creates the Yibum. The only reason that there's a problem here is because we have a Gzeira D'Rabbanan, and that's that we are afraid that people will be aware that she got divorced and will not know that she got remarried, and people will then learn a wrong halacha that a divorced woman falls to Yibum, or a divorced woman could marry her former husband's brother, which is of course incorrect. That's an Issakaris of Achaz Gushasa. So the Gemara asks, is it really true? You would think people would know that she's married to the man. There she is, she's living with him. That's something people see. That's a long-term thing. That she got divorced at some point in between, people wouldn't know. So Gemara says, no, but this case also has to be true in a case where she got divorced at night and the next morning he died. And therefore people would know that there was a divorce and did not see that she lived with him afterwards. And therefore they're unaware of it. And because of that case, where we would have an issue, therefore Rabbi Elazar asks her to do Yibum, she has to do Chalitza. So far we've seen Ifa, Abaye, and Rava. Now Rav Ashi's Pshat, as he says that the reason is that it's a Gzeira atu the case of the Yisayim B'chayav, atu the last case, where everybody agrees, where the Chachamim agree to Rabbi Elazar that it's us of her to do Yibum because she's a Grusha Dairaisa, because she was married by her father, and she's a Nisua only Darabanan because she was remarried on her own. And there, everybody gives us us to do Yibum, so what Rabbi Elazar is doing, he's making Zera to that case. And therefore he answers all cases of a woman who was remarried, even if she was a Gedol or Ketana, all along. Says the Gemara, this is logical, because you see the Gemara brings in that case in the Seifa, and why does the Gemara have to quote the case altogether? The case is obvious, everybody agrees. She's clearly a Grusha Deraisa, and she's only married Midrabanan, if even that. So why did that case is Tasha? The only reason it's brought in is to show that this is the reasoning of Rabbi Elazar all along. Now the Gemara quotes a Brisa which spells out this machlokes more at length, and the Gemara feels that it supports Rav Ashi's approach that Rabbi Elazar's whole opinion, the reason he answers in the regular case is because of Gzeira out to the case of Yisomim B'chayav. So the Brisa reads as follows. The Chachamim agree to Rav Elazar in a Ketana who was married off by her father and divorced, and that she is the Yisomim B'chayav, and she then gets remarried, it's also for her to do Yibum because of her original divorce, and that is a full-fledged divorce, but her remarriage is not a full remarriage. The Brisa continues and says this is only if she was divorced while she was a Ketana, and she was remarried while she was a Ketana. That way, the remarriage is only a D'Rabbanan remarriage. However, if she was divorced while she was a Ketana and remarried while she was a Gedola, then the remarriage is a D'Oraisa remarriage, and she's just as remarried as she was divorced, and the remarriage therefore erases her status as a Grusha. Or, if she was remarried as a Ketana, even if she was remarried as a Ketana, but she stayed married to him, and he died while she was a Gedola, then when she becomes of age, when she becomes a Gedola, any being that he has afterwards confirms the marriage and makes it a Deraisa marriage. So if either of those two cases, the Rabbanan would no longer agree. The Rabbanan would say, no, now she's as much remarried as she was divorced. They're both Deraisa, and therefore would go into the Machlokes Rabbi Elazar and the Rabbanan as to whether or not she's allowed to do Yibum. Says the Gemara, this clearly shows that Rabbi Elazar's whole opinion here, the reason that he has a Machlokes in this case, in these cases, because it's a Gzeira, to the case where she was Aser. Alright, now the Gemara says we have a question. Rava asked Rav Nachman, what about her tzara? What if this woman who's Aser to do Yibum, according to Rabbi Elazar, can her tzara do Yibum? There's nothing wrong with the tzara. The only potential problem would be Gzeira. If you allow the tzara to do Yibum, people will think that she could do Yibum herself. So the Gemara says, well, hold on a second. Right, we said, Rav Elazar, at least Rava holds, Rav Elazar's entire reasoning is because of Gzeira. So the tzara would be a Gzeira on top of another Gzeira. So we don't do that, we don't make a Gzeira. It says the Gemara, you have a kasha, Rabbi according to Elazar's opinion, and it says, he vitzarasa chaletzes. Both she and her tzara get chalitza. It says the Gemara, hold on a second, it can't be she and her tzara get chalitza. You never have two co-wives getting chalitza. It's always one and then patters the other. So it must mean she or her tzara both require chalitza. The Gemara says, okay, that's not a kasha. You had to change the meaning. Once you're changing the meaning, so change it a little differently. Say that the meaning should be she requires chalitza and her tzara requires either chalitza or yibum. Okay, this concludes the Gemara's commentary on the Mishnah, which now takes us to the next Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses what happens in a situation where two brothers are married to two sisters, and one of the brothers dies. His wife falls to yibum to the husband of her sister. So now there's an isser of achosishto here. So we know, we've seen very many times throughout the Masechta, achosishto is in erva, and therefore there should be a p'tor of arayos here, and she should go free. The question that comes up is, what if the wife, who is the sister of the Yevama, what if she's a Ketana? So her marriage, she's a Ketana Yisoma. So her marriage is only a marriage of D'Rabbanan. So the Mishnah discusses two cases. First of all, we'll discuss a simple case, and that is if the woman who's falling to Yibum is also Ketana Yisoma, so her marriage is also only D'Rabbanan. The two marriages are then on equal footing. So the Mishnah says, since they're both on equal footing, she's a regular Achos Ishto, she's as much falling to Yibum as her sister is as her sister's marriage to her Yavam is creating a situation of Achos Ishto, and therefore she goes free. She doesn't have to do anything. The question becomes, what if she is a Gedola? The one who's falling to Yibam is a Gedola. So she's falling to Yibam Deraisa. She has a Zika Deraisa. And her sister, who's married to her Yavam, is only a Ketani Soma. She only has a marriage, Dirabanan, a mutable marriage. So there's three ways of viewing this, and those are the three opinions that we have here. The first opinion is Rabbi Eliezer, who according to some Gersos is Rabbi Elazar. He says the Zika Deraisa knocks out the Ketana's marriage. Because that Ketana is now an Achos Zikukoso. Achos Zikukoso is the status of Isser Deraisa. The fact that she was a wife first doesn't help. She's usher to her husband now, and therefore we tell her to do mian. We teach her to do mian, get out of this marriage. Then the marriage is ended, and the Yavam does Yibum to the Yavam should he so desire. He can do Yibum to Chalitza, whatever he wants. That's Rabbi Elazar's opinion, that the Zika overrides the marriage of the Ketana. Rav Gamliel says no. Rav Gamliel holds that Zika is not so strong. The Zika doesn't knock her out, and therefore she's allowed to stay married. The fact that she's an Achos Zikukoso is not a big deal. He doesn't place such stock in that. The Ketana is allowed to stay married to her husband, and therefore we say stay married. And then when she grows up, she could decide. She could decide on her own what she wants to do. She could do mian if she wants. She could stay if she wants. Once she grows up, then her marriage becomes a deraisa marriage. The Gemara will discuss how. But her marriage becomes a deraisa marriage, and now that undoes the Zika. Now that Zika is broken, because it's now a Zikas Achos Ishto, so it's a Zika in the place of a Isser Erva, and that's broken. Now, that's Rabbi Gamliel's opinion. The last opinion here is Rabbi Yeshua, who says he's messed up and he loses both of them. He loses his wife because she's Achos Zikukoso, he loses his Yevama because she's Achos Ishto D'Rabbanan, and therefore he has to set them both free. His wife has to get a get from him, and his Eshes Achiv has to get Chalitza. We're not sure the status apparently of either of them, and therefore we have to set them both free. So the Gemara first discusses, is it possible you have a concept where you tell the Ksana to do mian? So the Gemara asks, we learned that you're not supposed to do mian. Mian is a bad thing, you're supposed to stay away from it. You're not supposed to cancel marriages without an official divorce. So the Gemara quotes a brisa of Bar Kapar, who says that a man should always stick to three things and stay away from three things. The three things he should stick to are Chalitza, meaning not to do Yibam. He should also stick to bringing peace, and he should stick to Hafaras Nedarim, canceling vows. Three things he should stay away from are Mian. The second thing is accepting deposits for other people, watching others' objects, and being an Arev, being a guarantor on a loan. So the Gemara's kasha is, how can we teach her to do mian? So the Gemara says this is different. This is mian in a place of a mitzvah, that we need her to do the mian here in order to allow the mitzvah of Yom to take place. Okay, now the Gemara is going to analyze Bar Kapara and the things that he said, and some other similar things we should or should not stay close to or avoid. So the Gemara says Bar Kapara said you should stick to three things. You should stick to three things. Chalitza. Why should you stick to Chalitza? Like Abba Shol, who you've seen earlier in the Masechta, who says that somebody who marries his Yevama, somebody does Yibum because he's attracted to her, because of Ishus, because of Taiva, because of beauty, whatever it is. If it's not L'Shem and Mitzvah, it's close to being an Isser Eishes Ach, and close to being that the children will be Mamzerim. Therefore, in order to make sure your kavanas are pure, since it's important to make sure your kavanas are pure, better off not risking it and doing chalitza and not yibam, and that's why we do chalitza today. Now, the second thing you should stick to is bringing peace. How about shalom? That's like the pasuk says, "Bakesh shalom v'rodveyu." Pasuk in the Tehillim says you should seek peace and pursue it. Now you link that pursuing to the pursuing where it says Rodav Tzakav Chesed Yimtzah Chaim Tzakav Kavod, and therefore it's a good thing. Just like someone who is Rodav Tzakav Chesed will find life, righteousness, and honor. The same thing will happen to someone who seeks peace. Now the third thing he said was Hafaras Nadarim. That means the canceling of vows. That's like Rabbi Nassan and Brisa, where Rabbi Nelson said you should avoid vows altogether. Somebody who makes a vow, it is as if he's building a mizbeach in his backyard, a private mizbeach outside the base of Mikdash during the time when those are aser, and the carbon he brings on there would be shchutei chutz. That's because he's making himself new mitzvahs that are not given, and therefore it's a bad thing. Should avoid vows altogether. Now, if he goes ahead and he actually keeps his vow, so then that's like he went a step further and he was actually makar of a carbon on that mizbeach, on that private mizbeach that he made, which is of course also. So what should he do if he made a vow? He should go to the chachamim and have it be canceled, and therefore hafaras nadarim, of course, is the best thing to do. Now, Bar Kapar also said there are three things that one should stay away from. What are those? And what's the reason for that? So we should stay away from because maybe she will get older, she'll change her mind, she'll want to go back, and now there was a problem created because she already was separated from him. He should not accept to watch people's objects. This is referring to where the person whose object you're watching lives in your town, and therefore the Gemara says your house is like his house. He can come into your house, he'll take back his object, you won't be aware of it, and then he'll come claim it, and you won't have it to return. He'll collect from you twice. And you should not be a guarantor. So the Gemara says that's talking about the guarantors of Sholtzion. Guarantors of Sholtzion, they would collect money from the guarantor before the actual borrower himself. They didn't go to the borrower, they went to the Orev, and therefore you would end up losing your money. Now, the Gemara quotes the statement of Rabbi Yitzchak, what is meant by the pasuk that says, Ra Yeroa ki orav zar v'sone tokim boteach. So you have Ra Yeroa ki orev. So there's two Ras about an orev. So the Gemara quotes a few things here. The Gemara says there's the simple explanation of this, and there is the hinted explanation of this. The simple explanation here is that we're saying that it's Ra Yeroa ki orev zar, when somebody brings a zar, when somebody brings a convert into Klal Yisrael, that's a bad thing. The hinted explanation is that it's talking about Arevos. Ra Yeroa ki Orev. Arevos is what it says here. That is a problem. And the rest of the pasuk says, Soni Tokim Boteach, that somebody who's Tokei Atzmo Ledvar Halacha, somebody who sticks himself on a halacha. So what are these three things here, and why are they problematic? So somebody who accepts Gerim is like Reb Chabal, who says that Gerim are bad for Yisrael, like Sapachas, is a skin disease, is bad for the skin. Rashi's explanation here is that because they don't learn properly, some of them, and they don't keep the halachos properly, and Klal Yisrael learn wrong halachos from their actions. Now, the Arevim, you shouldn't be an Arev, that's talking about those of Shaltzion that go collect from the guarantor before the actual borrower himself. The Kayas Melidvar Halacha, what does that mean? Somebody who sticks himself on halacha. So the Gemara quotes a Brisa. Rabbi says that's somebody who says Ein Loi Torah, he is Ein Loi Torah. Somebody says he didn't do any Torah, he doesn't have Torah, he doesn't get schar limud Torah. The Gemara says obviously if he didn't learn Torah, he's not going to get schar limud Torah. So what this means is someone who says he only has Torah, he only has Torah. That means if all he has is that he learned Torah, he didn't actually do Torah, he didn't keep the mitzvahs, he only learned it, so the only schar he gets is for the learning, not for the keeping. So the Gemara says, of course, again that's pashut, that wouldn't make sense, that's what we're learning here, because if the only thing he did is keep it, then the only thing he gets schar for is keeping it. So the Gemara says, no, what we actually mean to say is that he doesn't even get schar for keeping it, for learning it. Because he didn't keep it, the learning that he did doesn't bring him schar. So, what's the reason for that? Where's the source? And we're quotes Rav Papa, who says, V'limaditem v'asisem. Anybody who's doing the mitzvahs gets schar for limud, and somebody who doesn't do the mitzvahs doesn't get schar for limud. It says Gemara, there's another way of explaining the phrase that Rabbi said, Kol she'ein loi Torah, ein loi Torah. The Gemara is now going to go with the explanation, Kol Omer ein loi ela Torah, ein loi ela Torah. Someone who only has Torah only has Torah. What's the chiddush that the only schar he gets is Torah? That you may think that if other people who he taught do mitzvahs based on what he taught, he should get their schar, should get schar because of that also. But since he didn't do Torah, he doesn't get the schar of doing at all. Now, a third explanation of Tekei L'Dvar Halacha is that it's talking about judges who come to judge and they don't know the halacha. They have a comparison to another case, which is kind of similar but not really similar enough. Instead of asking their Rabbeim what the halacha is, they try to figure it out based on something else. So that's a problematic way of handling things, and that is what is meant here by Tekeya Atzmai Lidvar Halacha. So we have a pasuk that hints at this also. the Gemara quotes Shmuel bar Nachmanim or Yonasan, and it says the judge should always see as if he has a sword hanging above him or resting between his legs, and that Gehenim is open underneath him, and he'll fall in if he gives the wrong psak. Where do you see that? The pasuk says, "Hine mitasa shel Shlomo shishikim gibarim savula migabar Yisrael mipachad baleilais." So mitasa shel Shlomo refers to the Beis Hamikdash, which is the bed of peace, as it were. Shishim gibarim refers to judges, Sanhedrin, gibar Yisrael, and they have mipachad baleilais. They should have the fear of nights, referring to the fear of Gehenim when they sit in judgment. Okay, now the Gemara turns to the opinion of Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel had held in the case where you have the Gedola who has a Zika and her sister is married to her Yavam, but she is a Kitana. So Rabban Gamliel had said she's allowed to stay. There's no problem of the Zika. She's not also on her husband because she's an Achos Zikukaso. And when she grows up, then her marriage will become a deraisa marriage, and that'll knock off the Zika, and her sister, the Yevama, can go free. So we want to know, how does her marriage become when she grows up, how does her marriage become a deraisa marriage? And the Gemara has two possible ways of understanding this. The Gemara says, and this gets to the heart of what is the marriage of a Ketani Yisoma, what is it worth? So the Gemara's first approach is that a Ketani Yisoma's marriage is a marriage that's in suspense. The Kedushin is there. The Kedushin can't be Chal because she's only Ketana and her father did not meet Makabal Kedushin for her. However, that Kedushin is waiting when she becomes an adult. That Kedushin kicks in automatically. Therefore, this woman, when she grows up, her Kedushin will kick in automatically and it'll override the fact that there is a Zika on her sister at the time. Even though you normally wouldn't be allowed to marry Achos Zikukaso, since this Kedushin was done earlier, it kicks in right away. And therefore, it takes precedence and it'll become a deraisa marriage, and the Zika will break. Now, that's the Gemara's first understanding. The Gemara's second understanding is no. This Kedushin is worthless. It's absolutely nothing. It's a Derabanan Kedushin deraisa that has zero impact. The thing is that if somebody marries Achos Zikukaso, that Kedushin's Chal. You can marry Achos Zikukaso. There's no Isser to marry Achos Zikukaso. Once you do Kedushin to Achos Zikukaso, it breaks the Zika. The Zika is now a Zika to an Achos Ishto, and therefore it breaks the Zika. It's not a problem that the Ishto comes later than the Zikukaso. So which is Gamliel's actual pshat here? So the Gemara says it's a very important nafkamina. Does he have to do Kedushin when she grows up? At least does he have to do a Bia, which could be L'Shem Kedushin? Or do we say even if he never does, there is an automatic maturation of the Kedushin that took place before? So that's Gemara's question. The Gemara says that this was asked from Rabbi Elazar to Rav, and Rav responded, he said the reason that Rabbi Gamliel holds is because that you can do the Kedushin. The Kedushin will push off the Zika. It's not an automatic maturation. He can do Kedushin later. You have a right to do Kedushin to an Achos Zikukaso, and that breaks the Zika. So, therefore, halacha l'maisa, he has to do a Kedushin in order to break the Zika, or at least a Bia of some sort. So, Yevamos says, Rav Shesha says, I think Rav was falling asleep when he said this, because we have a Raisa that says otherwise. The Raisa says that somebody is Mekadesh a Ketana, that is Ketana Yisoma, the Kedushin is hanging. Its hanging seems to imply that the Kedushin is there, but it's not Chal until she grows up. Once she grows up, it's Chal automatically. Isn't that what hanging means? Someone says, no, that's not what hanging means. Hanging means it's hanging to see if he's going to do another Kedushin, if he's going to continue the Kedushin, if he's going to at least do a Bia once she becomes an adult. This Kedushin is nothing, but this marriage is hanging, and if he'll then renew it when she's an adult, then the Kedushin will count. That's what it means, and of course, therefore, you have to actually do it in order to be worth anything. The Gemara says, while she's a Ketana, they each have an interesting status vis-a-vis each other. He can divorce her, Bal Karcha, and she can do Min on him, Bal Karcha. So this marriage is very much a questionable marriage. They're each hanging, they each can send the other one away and end it without permission.